Hello and welcome to our webinar, Terrific Teen and Dazzling Debuts. I'm Annie Bostrom, Adult Book Senior Editor at Booklist, today moonlighting as a Youth Books Editor. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. Today's slide presentation, title list, and NetGalley links were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom an hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. You can also download the materials by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. If you have any trouble, please contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Finally, Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. From there, you can select show or hide subtitles from the menu that appears. And if you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting subtitle settings. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from the authors of 4 amazing books, and those authors are Trang Thanh Tran, author of She is a Haunting, Gabi Burton, author of Sing Me to Sleep, Jen St. Jude, author of If Tomorrow Doesn't Come, and the duo author team of David Bowles and Guadalupe García McCall here to talk about Secret of the Moon Conch. We will hear a brief presentation from each author, and then we'll have a Q&A with them about their book. So we'll start with Trang Thanh Tran. Trang grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in a big family of Vietnamese refugees. They enjoy writing speculative stories with big emotions about food, belonging, and the diaspora. Their favorite snack is iced coffee and a buttermilk biscuit, making the South the perfect home. She is a Haunting is their debut novel. Thanks for being here, Trang.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Trang Thanh Tran, and I am the author of She is a Haunting, which is my debut novel coming out in less than 2 weeks. This is the cover. And this is the Barnes & Noble edition cover. So it's a contemporary Gothic horror novel about a Vietnamese American girl who visits her estranged father in Vietnam and discovers that the French colonial house he's renovating has sinister plans for her and her family. So when I first told my mom I was writing this book, she was like, Trang, why do you write such weird stuff? And I felt like it really should have been obvious because I've been a horror movie fan for most of my life. And I love horror because I feel like it's a safe space where you can explore different anxieties, right? So you face the monster when you're ready, and then you get to close the book if it becomes too much or if you've pushed through. So horror is sort of like a choose your adventure book where like there's terrible things behind every door and you kind of push through to the end. In 2020, when I first started writing this book, I wanted to write for and about a teen who might have had like similar fears to my own, similar anxieties. So, coming out or not coming out to family, to friends, to the world, feeling like you're never enough because you grew up in 2 different cultures. Never really understanding your family because of that language barrier. Not understanding the full history of your family because of the terrible things that have happened and how these events have punched holes in like the sort of the collective memory in your family. And in She is a Haunting, the main character, Jade, is bisexual but closeted, and she has a very difficult relationship with her dad. And he's back in Vietnam, renovating this house where their ancestors were once servants. And she's angry at him and doesn't understand why he's doing this at first. But the longer she stays, the more of her fears she has to face. So for example, what if the one place where you belong is haunted? What if that place is so hungry for new residents that once you step inside, you can never leave? What if a beautiful ghost asks you to stay? And this is probably the most terrible question, but what if you are more like your dad than you ever thought you could be? And so it became sort of a coming of age ghost story, but I feel at its heart, it's still very much a family story. And I wanted it to be scary and heartbreaking and funny because growing up, fundamentally, it's like all those things. Growing up is such an intense experience. It can be so isolating and lonely. And I really wanted to focus in on that experience through a character like Jade. And in the book, the house also has point of view chapters because it has its own desires, its own agenda, its own history. And between the house's point of view and Jade's point of view, you get an idea of what happened nearly a century ago under French colonialism and how that history still influences Jade's family. And you also get a glimpse into the multiple women, and Jade included, who lived in this house. And that's actually where the title came from. She's a Haunting, is because there are multiple women who lived in this house, who've gone through different experiences in this house. And the book kind of offers that lens of seeing how things have changed or not changed over time. And I hope readers, especially teen readers, walk away feeling like, it struck an emotional chord with them. But the biggest message I feel like I have through the book is that they're always enough. No matter where they are in their coming out journey, no matter where they are, where they grow up, what language they speak, they are always enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Trang. It was so cool to hear more about this book from you. And we have a few questions for you too. So it's clear that you're a horror fan, as you mentioned, kind of embracing the safe space of horror.
Mm-hmm.
What was your motivation for telling this, what becomes a complex coming of age story for Jade? What was the motivation for telling it through the narrative of this haunted house?
Well, I started writing it in 2020 and I was stuck inside my house like everyone else. And I had this thought, like, what's going on with all the abandoned houses out there? Because we live so much of our lives inside houses, and especially for teenagers, the home is often where they spend a lot of their time, right? And they're often restricted because the home is often the parents or their guardians. So it's like, I felt like it was the perfect place to tell a coming of age story, because it's like she's literally, Jade, the main character, literally is stuck in this house with her dad, and even worse, it's haunted. So it's like literally the worst thing that can happen to a teenager. And I just felt like it was also interesting to kind of view the house as a being on its own with its own desires, and how that comes into conflict with what Jade wants as well.
So interesting. So both Jade and the house are haunted by the past, and your descriptions of the house with these like strange infestations of diseased bugs and the humidity that you can feel as you're reading the book, it like builds this feeling of dread. But you mentioned food, even in your bio actually, and can you take a moment to talk about the food that Jade's ba cooks and the way that it's somehow both really enticing and viscerally repulsive?
So like food, at least in my family, is a big part of our culture. We eat together like every Saturday, and it's a big part of like our connection with one another, even if we don't have these difficult or these intimate conversations. And so food is one thing that I really wanted to build in Jade's story. Like, how does her dad convey care or convey control through what he makes her to eat? So that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is like, I just wanted to show off how just delicious Vietnamese food is, right? And like just describing it was really fun, like being able to describe the taste, the smells, and the part where it has to do with the bugs and the parasites, that just came from like, you never know what you're eating. I watched one too many, shows on, I think it's Animal Planet, of different parasites, and it's like literally anything you eat can have anything in it. And I felt like that was pretty terrifying, and it was fun to kind of throw in together like all my weird interests and make it work.
I like it because I'm not like athletic or anything, but I like the idea that eating can be an extreme sport. You know, it's like we're taking risks, we're living our lives. Love it.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about the way you managed the different voices and the point of view chapters with the house and for Jade, just how you kept those separate?
Mhm. So for Jade's voice, I really wanted it. I wanted her to sound like a teenager, and I wanted her to sound straightforward, but at the same time, someone who hides a lot of herself. And so that came out, and that's why she's so funny, because I think she uses the humor to deflect sometimes. And that's where the house's voice. I wanted the house to sound different as the book went on, because it's, the house is a living thing, but it becomes more alive as the book continues. And that's how the house's voice shifts a little bit over time, is that it almost sounds more and more like a person with each chapter from the house that you read. And in Jade's point of view, I wanted her focus to kind of narrow in and become even more claustrophobic. So like she sounds pretty normal teenager at the beginning, but as the longer she stays inside the house, it's like her voice becomes more cramped, almost more quick thinking.
That's cool. Yeah, and we have time for just one more quick question, and this is just, what was the most fun part of the book for you to write?
Honestly, I think it was the house point of view chapters, because it's like so unhinged. So I was able to just kind of like let go a little bit. And I think with those chapters, I think there's a little bit more room to kind of almost let it be poetry, because they're very short, they're very quick, but I wanted to convey like a punch each time.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Trang. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
telling us more about your book. We will hear next from Gabi Burton, who wrote Sing Me to Sleep. Gabi grew up reading and writing in St. Louis, Missouri, and she recently graduated from Bowdoin College, and now she works as a paralegal and author in Rhode Island. When she's not working or writing, she's probably watching Netflix, scrolling through Twitter, or finding beautiful places to walk, preferably near a body of water. Tell us about your book, Gabi.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Gabi, and I'm the author of Sing Me to Sleep. Sing Me to Sleep is a YA fantasy about a siren named Saoirse who lives in a kingdom where sirens are not allowed to exist. And so in order to protect her little sister, she has to take a job as a bodyguard to the crown prince of her kingdom. She expects to hate him because his father is the reason why her existence is illegal. But as they start to work together, they grow closer and they start working together to track down an assassin in their kingdom. But little does he know that the assassin in question is actually Saoirse. This book is also set in a world where all the characters are Black and brown, and I just had so much fun writing it. And it was kind of a cathartic experience to write it as well. Something that was really important to me about the character of Saoirse is that she is a Black woman, and she is a siren. She loves the water. It gives her power. It invigorates her. She is someone who is confident and feels powerful and beautiful, which is something that I really admire and something that I strive to be. Growing up as a kid, swimming was always my favorite sport. My entire family is very athletic. My mother would play Division I basketball in college. My father was a hurdling champion in college. My brothers play basketball, football, soccer, and they are all track stars. And I didn't like any of it. I do not like sports. But the one thing that I did enjoy was swimming. My parents encouraged me to get into competitive swimming, but I never wanted to do it. I always refused because I was, and remain to this day, very self-conscious about my hair. All of my friends were white, and I'd gotten enough questions, comments, side looks with my hair, even though it tended to be straight. And so swimming was never something I felt comfortable doing during the school year, because I knew that I would get so many looks and questions and comments, and I wasn't really wanting to deal with that. And in high school, I was coerced by my parents to join this high school swim team. And during swim season, I was just always miserable. I always felt really bad about myself. It was impossible to feel beautiful or confident at all during swim season, just 3 months out of the year. every year that I just hated it. And even though swimming was something that I always actually really liked doing. And so when I started writing this book, and I've always loved mermaids and sirens. And so when I started writing this book and I realized that I had this black siren who would get to love the water and swim and do all the things that I enjoy doing, it occurred to me that since this is fantasy, I had the ability to write a story in which she doesn't have to deal with any sort of my insecurities. I wouldn't have to pass that on to her. She could exist in a world that was for people that look like her. Saoirse has a lot of problems, but none of her problems are ever going to be because of her race or because of her hair, because of her skin color, none of those things. And so writing a character that was allowed to be powerful and beautiful and confident and in the water with all the stigma around Black people and swimming was really cathartic for me. And so a big reason why I wrote this book and who I wrote this book for was for me as a kid, the me who felt just generally very bad about herself in any situations where I felt like white people were looking at me especially hard, but also just for any Black girls who felt the way I did growing up, feel the way I did growing up, just like all eyes are on you, or like you're not allowed to just exist without being judged. I wrote this book for Black girls like that, and I hope that they enjoy this book as much as I did writing it. Something else that was really important to me about the character of Saoirse is that she is far from perfect. She is very morally gray. I would argue she's about as morally gray as you can get. She does murder quite a few people, and she enjoys it. And that was important to me, that we have Black women who are allowed to be far from perfect and allowed to make mistakes and allowed to grow and learn. And I wouldn't even say that she ever gets to the point of being perfect. It's not a story of her, you know, turning into necessarily a good person. But I think through it all, you still see her heart. And it is my hope that Black girls feel like they are allowed to be confident and beautiful, but also like they do not have to be perfect. So I hope that people love reading it as much as I loved writing it.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you so much for sharing the backstory and a little bit about your writing experience. And you kind of answered this question, but when you first started writing this story, was Saoirse always going to be a siren? Was the siren always going to be Saoirse? Like which piece came first?
The siren definitely came first. I was on a Zoom call with some author friends and we were talking about monsters. And I've always loved like mermaids and sirens. I loved that show H2O, Just Add Water, one of my favorites. And I was like, oh my gosh, I would love to write about sirens. And I was really excited to write a Black siren. So she was always going to be a siren.
What was your favorite scene to write in the book?
I really liked writing the murder scenes. They were a lot of fun. I feel like I got to explore different ways to kill people in books, and I enjoyed it. I definitely have written like some fun little like bonus chapters that were just, you know, her killing people. So that was fun.
I love it. It's like the extra scenes at the end of the movie, if you stay tuned.
Yeah.
Also, I was hoping you were going to say the murder scenes, but that's really. So Saoirse has two sides of herself. I mean, more than two sides, but at least two sides. Was it difficult for you to write, you know, multiple parts of one person, or did it flow kind of seamlessly?
Honestly, I feel like it flowed very seamlessly. I think probably a lot of Black people, probably BIPOC in general, will have the experience of kind of having like two sides, like the side kind of, or at least two sides, like the side you kind of present out in public, the side you're allowed to be like when you're comfortable more with like your family or in a space for more people like you. I think it's like a pretty common experience. And so that part was pretty easy to tap into because I feel like her duality is something that a lot of people experience to some extent.
There are so many twists and betrayals in the book. So I'm picturing like, did you have the red yarn on the wall, or did it take a lot of planning and outlining, or is that another kind of seamless side to writing for you?
No, I am a major plotter. If I did not plan out all the things that are going to happen, like nothing would happen ever. So yeah, like even like when editing and we're like adding in twists or like changing things up, pretty much always like I would have to re-outline to figure out, okay, so if this changes to this, like how does this turn? I do not have the capacity to write twists or even like foreshadowing twists, without having a plan in place.
Do you have a preferred method for outlining? Do you use a notebook, or do you like to see, like, are you visual on a wall or something?
I really got into Scrivener. I actually don't know how I was able to write before Scrivener, but for me, I outline all the individual like side plots or like subplots like separately, like from beginning to end, and then I put them all together. So it's like they're all individually plotted out, and then it's like, okay, how do they work into like a larger narrative? And then you have to make it smoother and flow in editing.
The puzzle.
Yeah, exactly.
So no spoilers, but after that explosive ending, what are you most looking forward to continuing in Saoirse's story?
Um, I'm most excited to further develop her relationship with Hayes. The first one is very much a slow burn. So the second one, it's like, all right, we did the slow burn thing. Time to move on.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. It's been so great to hear more.
Thank you for having me.
We next are going to hear from Jen St. Jude. Jen is a Lambda Literary Fellow who holds creative writing degrees from Colby College and Harvard University Extension School. She works in talent acquisition and has served as an editor at the Chicago Review of Books, Arcturus Magazine, Burning Worlds, Climate Change in Art and Literature, and Just Femme and Dandy Magazine. Jen grew up in New Hampshire apple orchards, but now lives in Chicago with her wife and cat-like dog. Take it away, Jen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And in addition to my bio, I now have a 4-month-old baby too. She's the best, so had to add her. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. My book, If Tomorrow Doesn't Come, will be out this May from Bloomsbury. It is a YA speculative fiction novel about Avery Byrne, who is a freshman in college. She's been hiding big pieces of herself from big people in her life. She's queer. She's in love with her best friend and has been for a long time, but also sort of just realized it. She's also suffering from clinical depression, which is made even worse when she goes to college and all her safety nets are stripped away. She's no longer the star soccer player. She's no longer the star student, or at least she's one of many, many. Her best friend is gone, her friends are gone, and her family isn't there to kind of keep an eye on her. And so she starts to really unravel. At the start of the book, she's made the decision to die by suicide. But before she can, she finds out there's an asteroid coming and they have 9 days left to live. So she returns home, falls in love with her best friend even deeper, and really falls in love with her family, and most importantly, maybe herself all over again, and really finds hope and learns to live. I started writing this book in 2012, so I'll date myself a little here, but I was a senior in college and I had just returned to school after failing out. I was severely depressed, coping with mental illness, and I really didn't see how it could ever get better. So I started writing this, not even as a choice, just it was the only thing I could write about because I could only see that far in front of myself, living in this cloud every day. And it was really just, it was never, like writing about depression is hard because it's flat, it's numb. There's no narrative arc, and to shape it even almost sometimes feels not genuine. But I think in the same way, there's no one reason why someone's depressed. It's layers on layers, it's little thing after little thing. Healing, it turns out, is that way too. Healing isn't just one thing that's going to fix your life or one person, or even one day, and it'll never probably get better forever completely. But when I started writing this book, it was pretty bleak. As I wrote it though, I sort of started to heal in my own life. I realized I was gay, I came out, I found community, I met my wife, I started finding purpose, after school in the different jobs that I had, and also writing this book, it was like something that was so healing to me. And given me like the best people in my life, and it's just been a real joy to write. So as my life healed, the story took on a more hopeful, tone too. But I think it was pretty hard earned. It was not. I did not set out to write a really helpful book or, a really preachy or a lesson type book. It was just really writing through my own life and my experience. And so it means a whole lot to me because it has tracked so much in my life. I think I also just want to note that it's a speculative book. It alternates between past flashbacks and the present day timeline. And there was a couple of reasons for that. One, I think it's sort of a queer way of telling a story. I, at least when I realized that about myself, looked back on my whole life and retold my life to myself because there were so many things that didn't make sense at the time, but looking back was like, oh, that's what that was about. Yes. So it's kind of Avery going back through her life. It's also sort of flashing before her eyes. I think the past scenes also add some levity. It's obviously kind of a heavy topic. They're in a very tough situation with the world potentially ending in 9 days. But I really wanted people to see who the characters were before this happened and what they really stood to lose as the world may or may not come to an end. And I think my final note is just, it is a hard book, I think, but I think it's hopeful too. And I really want it to reach readers and show them they're not alone, first of all, that, help people understand depression if maybe they haven't experienced it themselves. But really it's for people dealing with mental illness who feel very alone. And this is kind of me reaching out to them saying like, hey, like we're all keeping it really quiet, but a lot of us are going through this. You're not alone. It can get better and it'll be even better if we let tomorrow come. So.
Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing the amazing backstory for your book. I have a few other questions. So if Tomorrow Doesn't Come is a speculative thriller, and you kind of went over this, but the very first thing that we see is Avery ready to end her life right before she finds out that the world is going to end in 9 days. So can you talk about the reason for setting kind of Avery's personal story, like her personal apocalypse, against the larger backdrop of something that's about to happen to the whole world?
Yeah, so I think initially I was curious around what would it be like for this character in this situation who's maybe not happy about it. Actually, she's devastated for her friends and family and the rest of the world, but she's also kind of unsurprised because that's sort of how she's been feeling for so long. I also think when you're depressed, you feel, again, like you're alone. And so it was sort of like, here's this end of the world metaphor. What happens then when everybody's feeling that way and going through this together? And how does that change how she thinks about her own experience and how do they navigate it together? They all have different goals and things that they want to achieve in that time, if that's all they have left.
So we hope that an asteroid heading toward Earth makes this not a realistic necessarily story. There are so many aspects about it that are so real, and especially the depiction of Avery's depression. And you talked about this a bit, but what do you want young readers to take away, especially from the mental health aspect of Avery's story?
Yeah, I think what I really want them to take away from it is hope for a better life, especially if they have never seen it for themselves, if they're queer, maybe living in a small town. I didn't really have many examples when I was younger of adults who were out and living their life and happy and proud, let alone in media. So I think the more we can tell the story of things getting better, and also that you can just be in the absolute worst moment of your life, and the next week the best thing that has ever happened to you happens, and it's really just worth sticking around for. And also finally, just sharing your story and sharing parts of yourself might be scary, and you have to find people you really trust, but it's worth it, and it really changes your whole life.
I think we have maybe one more question. Time for one more question. So Avery's relationship with her family is complicated, and their religious faith makes her feel like she has to hide herself, like not just her depression, but who she really is. And she thinks she would be an outcast if she acknowledged that she was in love with her best friend Cass. So can you talk about some of the choices you made and why, like, especially with the family dynamics?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in some families, parents are not accepting of their LGBTQ children, and it's like you're kicked out, you're cut off, you never talk again, and that's obviously crushing and devastating. I think it's more common, though, that it's kind of like you love your family and they love you too. Maybe they have a belief system, maybe it's Catholicism, which is what's in the book, where they like truly believe in their heart that if you are gay, you will go to hell, and they're trying to save you from that. It's not even that like they hate you, they love you, they want to save you, which ultimately has a very like toxic and damaging impact. I mean, I'm older now, I'm happy, I have recovered from a lot of like my religious upbringing, but at the same time, when I hear the Pope, say it's still a sin, like something, I feel like my soul like crinkles up like a piece of paper a little bit. Like I still feel that crushing feeling in my chest. I think I really wanted to include it because it is like a gray area with the family. Like they love her very much. They've done everything for her and she feels that. But they still have harmful beliefs that make her feel like she has to hide.
Yeah. Okay. One quick more question. Do you think that the book, again, no spoilers, but do you think that it has a happy ending?
I think so. You can choose your own adventure a little bit too, but I like to think that tomorrow does come.
All right. Thank you so much, Jen. Our final presentation today will be from the authors of Secret of the Moon Conch. Sorry, I muted myself. David Bowles and Guadalupe García McCall. David is an award-winning Mexican-American author and translator from Texas. His books include The Smoking Mirror, Feathered Serpent, Dark Heart of Sky, and They Call Me Guido. He has been published in the New York Times, School Library Journal, Strange Horizons, English Journal, Rattle, Translation Review, and the Journal of Children's Literature. In 2017, he was inducted into the Texas Institute of Letters, and in 2020, he co-founded #Dignidad Literaria, a social justice movement advocating for greater Latinx representation in publishing. Guadalupe is the award-winning author of Under the Mesquite, Summer of the Mariposas, Shame the Stars, All the Stars Denied, and Echoes of Grace. She has received a Pura Belpré Author Award, a Westchester Young Adult Fiction Award, and the Tomas Rivera Mexican-American Children's Book Award, and was a finalist for the William C. Morris Award and the Andre Norton Award for Young Adult Science Fiction and Fantasy. She advocates for literacy and diverse books. She lives with her husband in Texas. Thank you both so much for being here, David and Guadalupe.
It's a pleasure. So excited to be here.
It is a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah. So the Secret of the Moon Conch has got two different points of view. Mine is Callisto, and in 1521, Callisto he's an Aztec teen. He's trapped in the city of Tenochtitlan, which is under siege by the Spanish. And Callisto, desperate to escape, finds his dead mother's sacred conch, and he makes a plea to the gods, sounding the trumpet and asking them for help.
500 years later, a Mexican girl named Citlali is being targeted by a low-level criminal, a gangster, who has decided that she is the one. She is the love of his life. And he's going to try and, get with her. Desperate to get away, she decides to go to the United States and look for her father, her last living relative. On her last day, she goes to the beach with her friends and finds a magical moon conch.
Right, and this moon conch is what connects them over the centuries, mind to mind. And as the moon gets bigger in the sky, they become visible and are eventually able to touch each other. And this helps them to protect each other, to give each other advice and help each other get through hardships, but also it leads to their falling in love.
Yes, because even 500 years can't keep them apart.
No. So it's this really, really kind of touching supernatural romance, and it, you know, it was a complicated and lovely book to write. It's never been depicted in fiction in the U.S. The story of the fall of the Aztec Empire, the fall of the city of Tenochtitlan, and so it was like really lovely to be able to write that historical part, and also play around with some of the notions of the religion of the Mexica people, the Aztecs, and use some of that in this supernatural romance to find a way to bridge the centuries between the two characters.
And I wanted to depict something kind of like that movie, The Lake House, with Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. I thought that would be a lovely situation where we have a young girl in modern times struggling to find her family, find her place, migrate, which is her God-given right, and find herself in a situation where she is alone and needs help.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show how through centuries and understanding who we are in this world and where we come from, we can literally help each other.
Yeah. And which is really fantastic. You think about how they're both essentially orphans, right? They're both right. They've lost everything, and they're in very similar situations, even though they're 500 years apart. There's like an oppressive government that is dismantling their community in some way and putting them in harm's way. And so I was super excited when you came to me with this idea, and such a delight to see it finally coming out there in our debut as a writing team. This is really, really cool.
Thank you, David and Guadalupe, for telling us a little bit more about how this book came to be. So neither of you is a debut author, but this is your first book together. And how is it this one? Were there other stories you thought about writing together? What made you tell this one now?
I can tell you why I approached David. So I was watching The Lake House, and it had just started rolling the credits. And I, talking to myself, said, I love that movie. Why hasn't somebody thought of something like that? And my husband, who's in the kitchen, he says, well, I don't know. Maybe if we had a YA author in the room, we could ask her. And I was like, ha ha. And immediately I saw the story. I saw Citlali, I saw her fleeing, I saw her, you know, the hardship of going through the things that she has to go through without giving anything away. But then I thought, I saw him. I saw Calixto. I didn't know his name. I just knew he was a warrior during the fall of Tenochtitlan. And immediately I thought, oh, I don't know anything about that. Not like really know anything about that. And then being an assistant professor of English, I just couldn't imagine devoting 5 years to research. And then it hit me, wait a minute, I have a friend who knows everything.
I have a friend who's done like decades of research into that, and he's a writer too. Oh, yeah.
The language. And so the next conference we were at, or the next panel we were at, I don't remember exactly where, I approached him and I said, I have this idea. What do you think? Yeah. And David can tell you how he felt.
Oh yeah, I thought it was a fantastic idea. And like I mentioned before, like it's, you know, the historical part has never been told before in a book for adults or for teens. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity. We were coming up on the 500th anniversary of the Spanish invasion of Mexico, and I just thought it would be perfect to explore those parallels.
So perfect. And you know, you talked about, well, inherent in the book is this story that's bridging 500 years and two people, and your two authors that found, I mean, it's just, it couldn't be more perfect, really.
Yeah, no, I think it was really, really great. And I mean, we wanted to draw, you know, parallels, because at the time that this idea came to Guadalupe, you know, there were, I mean, things have gotten marginally better, but not that much. But there were a lot of problems for asylum seekers and refugees coming out of Mexico and Central America, areas that are, you know, called Mesoamerica in traditional terms. And so it just seemed, when we thought about it, like, you know, Mexicans, Central Americans are the descendants of indigenous people from before the conquest. And it feels like, you know, 500 years later, they're still like this struggle is still going on. And so
the persecution, the oppression, the hardships, you know, every step of everything we try to do, every step of the way, there seems to be gates closing, locked doors, things that say step back. And so I thought it was a really good parallel, and because it explains to our young people why those things are still here, where they stem from, how long it's been, and how we're still fighting the same, fights and struggling the same way.
Yes, and I wanted to ask you specifically about that. What do you want, besides the idea of, some comfort in history, but what do you want young readers to take away from the story and perhaps better understand about the history of the Mexican people?
Yeah, this idea that Guadalupe was talking about, that certain patterns repeat themselves, and when you internalize colonization and certain types of mentalities, that kind of stuff gets perpetuated, and you have to like make a concerted effort. You have to inform yourself. You have to understand history in order not to repeat it again. So we want people to come away with that, but we also want people to come away with the idea that sometimes love can be that thing that you can lean into. Sometimes community, other people, because Callisto and Citlali have each other, and they have the Moon Conch, which magically allows them to get past a lot of obstacles. But they also have people around them, like Citlali does as she crosses into the U.S. and undergoes a lot of tribulations there. She finds community, she finds people who help her, and Callisto does as well. As the city falls and there's all this destruction and he's got to flee. And so, yeah, that's important as well, that you can find solace and support.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things for me as the story grew was seeing that this wasn't just story of the individual, it was the story of family. So it was a story of love, but it's also the story of family and the story of community, and how in solidarity we can make a better world for ourselves in this grand scheme of things. And so that's what I want people to see, the solidarity and how we can make it better.
Yeah. Just a quick, we do have to wrap up, unfortunately, but a process question that I know I'm interested in, I think a lot of other people are in, is how did you go, I'm sure you can answer this in 30 seconds. How did you go about writing this book together? And can you talk a little bit about how it's different than when you've written books by yourselves? And like perhaps, the writing, the revision process, how did you work that out together?
Yeah, well, I'll take it real quick, okay? So, obviously it was a complex book. It took us 2 years to plan. We're both planners. It helps when your co-writer writes very similar to you, and we do. We both come from the same area. We speak the same way. We think the same way. We're both English teachers, very similar. But we had to figure out a way to make the pattern of the book follow history, as well as the phases of the moon, because as the moon gets bigger, they're able to come in contact. So that was a very complex thing. And while my story was rooted in history and was complicated because of research, Guadalupe's story was complicated because she had to find a way to carve out a story that would fit mine, and where Callisto was weak, Citlali would be strong, and vice versa. So it was very, very complex, but a lot of fun. And we did almost everything online through Google Docs, and just having really great conversations.
Anything you want to add to that, Guadalupe?
I just want to say that to have a collaborator, and you get the chapter, because we would send each other the next chapter, so the story was growing in the document, and to see the great literary piece that's just been gifted to you, it makes you step up your game. So every time I would see something beautiful in his, I would think, oh, I've got to step it up, because I have to balance this novel. It has to be just as good as his piece.
I felt the same way. And then at the end, we had to cut 30,000 words from this massive manuscript. So that's the story for another day.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. This was just amazing to hear from you, and amazing to hear from all of our authors today. Really can't thank you enough for being here and for sharing such generous stories about your work. Thank you so much, Trang, Gabi, Jen, David, and Guadalupe. And a final thank you to our sponsor, Bloomsbury Publishing. This concludes today's webinar. See you all next time.